So thanks again for joining us. I'm Nicole Del Mastro Jeffrey, and I am a fourth-year doctoral student in Education Policy Organization and Leadership at the University of Urbana-Champaign. And I'm also a research assistant with OCCRL. And I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be joining all of you today to have a wonderful conversation about streamlining and leveraging resources for the CLNA. All right, so as always with OCCRL, we want to be very intentional about our purposes and our mission. At OCCRL, we're researchers who study policies and programs and practices designed to enhance outcomes for diverse youth and adults who seek transition to and through college all the way into employment. We focus on transformative leadership, comprehensive P through 20 educational systems and pathways, and public engagement, while also ensuring that we center equity and equity-driven change in everything that we do. So today we have some wonderful guests with us, and I want to ensure that we first give a quick overview of what we'll be talking about. Today is a quick coffee break chat webinar, so we'll go by quickly, but we do hope to talk about enhancing the process to completion for planning with your CLNA. We also want to discuss recentering equity in the planning and execution of the CLNA. And this will be a great opportunity for all of you to chat with each other and to ask questions towards the end to think about how you can strategize and synergize techniques used by other colleges to advance your own CLNA. All right, so as a reminder, and I'm sure many of you know, and you're probably fairly familiar with the Perkins V legislation, which is where CLNA is also a component of or birthed out of. As I was reviewing the Perkins V legislation to prepare for our chat today, I took some notes of a couple things that I noticed. And one of the things that came to my attention was that quality is listed over 15 times in the federal legislation. It discusses altering inequities for the betterment a variety of times. And students being an important component to this work was mentioned over 200 times. So I was not expecting to see it that many times, but was happy to see that in the legislation. And also it discusses within the context of the legislation, the CLNA, which is mentioned over a dozen times with specific aims to change student enrollment patterns and to reduce disparities. So without further ado, we're going to hear from some folks here in our local state of Illinois. And we are going to go ahead and start with Kristina. She's going to introduce herself, tell us her name, her institution affiliation, her role within her institutional context, and the years of experience working with CTE programs. So Kristina, thank you for being here. Take it away.
Thanks. I'm Kristina Shelton. I'm a director of Perkins and CTE at Rend College in beautiful, out in the country, Ina, Illinois, in Southern Illinois. I have been at Rend College for, I didn't know what I was, I think 14 years, directly working with Perkins for 12, I believe. But I've been all together with community colleges for about 18 years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I just got a note from Joanne. She's actually working right now, speaking of students, with a student situation that came up, but she hopes to join us here shortly. So once she joins us, we will be sure to have her introduce herself, and we will just wrap her right into our Q&A today. All right. Okay. I'm toggling between screens here. So let's go ahead and begin with our first question. If you have a follow-up question or something you'd like to say, please, by all means, feel free to raise your electronic hand and I will get to your questions. All right, first question for you. What are the specific responsibilities that fall under your purview within your institutional context related to CTE?
So again, I'm the director of Perkins, and I prepare our annual Perkins plan and all our quarterly reporting, and I lead our CLNA team. And I also have, often we'll have other grants. Previous grants we've had, I can't even tell you how many we've done in the past. In 12 years, you do a lot. But we've definitely done like the CT improvement one. But one that I feel like really, we've done several pathways to results, and that pathways to results experience, I think, really helped me with coming up with an idea of the ways to work on with the comprehensive local needs assessment.
Thank you. All right. Question 2. What are your suggestions for aligning the CLNA work with the equity goals of your college?
Well, my suggestion would be to be well prepared prior to hosting your CLNA meeting. You're with your partners. You definitely can't fix something if you don't know what it is that's broken, right? So the information that I took to our first partner meeting was just information to help our group stay focused and to develop a relevant plan. I think you need to make sure you know your college's strategic plan, know what services are already being offered specifically in regards to equity, inclusion, student success, recruitment, retention of faculty, and then know your Perkins performance measures. Even if you meet all the goals, like look at those disaggregated data. Are you seeing any inequities in that? Are your students, are your students with disabilities completing with the same rate as your students without? Do you see any racial disparities? And then prepare a report for your CLNA meeting. I also think it's important to know your overall college district demographics. And are your college demographics of students attending your college comparable to your college district demographics? And then when we had our first CNL meeting, I brought prepared reports with, such as the overview of the Perkins performance measures, with any of those disparities highlighted, our district demographic report, and our labor market industry report. And doing that research ahead of time, I think, was helpful because we were able to use our time to discuss strategies and resources, rather than trying to focus on finding the issues.
Wonderful. So a lot of that work, what I heard you say, was done in advance before the partners meeting.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And how do you go about collecting that information throughout the year, right? Because it sounds like it's part of this larger process. So it's things you're picking up and you're collecting along the way. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you've done that specifically? So whether that's a day-to-day operation, or is that a weekly gathering of information, or how do you do that?
Well, I mean, it's probably more of collecting the information that other people, I try not to do as much work. I mean, if I don't have to do something, I'm not going to do it. But other people have done, you can, use other people, things they've done. And we have several things they do here on campus. I think it's other questions that are coming up, but through program review. And then there's things that each of those programs do on an annual basis when they're preparing for the advisory committee meetings, where they'll collect information specifically on their students for, each individual program. Like with our Perkins performance measures, we're kind of limited to just seeing your overall results, or now, which is wonderful with the new pods that they've come up with, we can do it at least by cluster.
Right.
But we've never really been able to. You might see that you have an issue, with an inequitable completion rate for African American students, but you can't see specifically maybe which programs those are. So I think it's getting a little better. Like I said, now with the clusters, we can at least see the clusters and maybe pinpoint the programs. But each of our programs do. We incorporated into their advisory committee handbooks that they hand out or they use for each meeting, these reports to their advisory that show some of those student demographic information, the completion rates, so forth. Right. And then kind of also like their labor market information. And then that's something they can discuss annually each year with their advisory committee. So they're kind of doing the legwork on that. And I don't have to. So that's great. And some of them, of course, then you just have to pull it together to use it as overall. So.
Wonderful example. Thank you for expanding on that.
Okay.
All right. Question 3. Are there opportunities for students to be engaged in this process? If so, what does it look like? And if not, what are your thoughts about doing this in the future?
Again, so I'm gearing up, kind of getting ready to work on our second CLNA, like everybody else probably is as well. At our first one, we did invite some students, and we specifically targeted some special pop students that we were helping, that we were giving direct support to, some transportation assistant in Linney Library. And I know we had one, I'm trying to think, I can't remember, we either had 1 or 2 show up to our actual partner meeting that we had. We did include that. Now we could have been a bigger voice. And when at the forum this year, I don't remember what school it was, but there was a college that was presenting at the forum, and they had discussed using some kind of survey that they sent out to their local employers to get their input for the CLNA. And I thought, well, that might be something that would be beneficial for students too. I don't know how many you'd get, but we might be able to, try to survey some of those students. So that is something I'm thinking about maybe implementing this year, but definitely we need to hear from the students, I think.
That's wonderful. Nice to hear how you're incorporating that work into gathering information from the students, but even getting feedback from them about improvement processes along the way. All right. Okay. When thinking about best practices and considering your student demographics, can you describe how conducting the program review process has informed initiatives relevant to the CLNA and vice versa?
Well, and I kind of, when we were talking just a minute ago, I kind of answered part of this question through that, because our IR department, when they switched up and started doing the program review, and they changed the sections and so forth, and they brought more of that, kind of having you look at more of the disaggregated data, looking at more about your success rate, and looking, having you look at gender and race and some of your special pops categories, and kind of try to identify any gaps you might have. Our IR department, created created reports for our programs to use for their program review. At the same time, then those are now available for those programs to use to help them create those reports, or the report templates that we created for their advisory committees. So then they can gather that information on an annual basis and share it with their advisory committee and get kind of like their input on it as well. So it's kind of nice because they're not doing it just once every 5 years. They're doing it every year. It helps them because they don't have to stress about the bulk of all this stuff to look at 5 years worth of data. They can just look at that current year's and add it to their previous years. And then it also helps them identify any potential equity issues sooner. And 5 years is a long time in between. Right. So if they look at it every year annually, then they can, find those issues ahead of time. And then any issues in the past that they have found, it helps them to help collect their information for their measure. Has the things that they've put in place to try to help those issues, are they helping? What are the results at the end? So basically we utilize those. Specifically, we use program review reports to help us complete our CNL program size, scope, and quality section. That really helped with that section for me.
Wonderful. So what I heard you saying was that there's a big component to looking at the disaggregated data for each program and then comparing it across different years. And if there's a continuing area for improvement, that's noted and discussed well in advance of the full 5-year process. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Wonderful. Can you give us an example of an area where maybe you have implemented that change and what that looked like in a specific program where feedback was given? So for example, if you notice the special pops area that could use some improvement on the long run, that goes to the program for implementation. But what does that process look like of those kinds of conversations within the context of the institution?
Right. Okay. Well, I'm trying to think offhand specifically of one that would be a good example. I think what the one, and this is kind of across several programs at this time. You know, we'll have a program that'll say, oh, we're this is where it comes into play, having that information about what your district demographics looks like as well. So something that we've recently kind of like really come into looking at, and it's not just one program, it's multiple programs, especially specifically in our applied science and technology division. And we kind of talked about that in our CLNA report last year, which it's really kind of there's a racial divide as far as between divisions within our community college, because a racial and a gender divide, because when you come to health sciences or programs in, social, like human services or health sciences and so forth, there is some gender, there's some gender diversity, there's some racial diversity. But when it comes to applied science and technology programs such as like welding or industrial electronics and automotive, those tend to be male white students. And so if I were to go into my nursing program and I see that we have about 10%, okay, so I'm gonna just kind of give you some examples. Do I see it as an issue or not an issue, just as an example, and why it comes to that. In our nursing program recently, we were looking at information, and then we noticed that about 13% of the students were male. And it seems like that doesn't seem like that's great, but when you look at the employment and the people that are employed, it's probably there's probably a higher number of male students in the program that are actual males out in the occupation. So that's not too bad of a number, although we'd like to see it higher. It is kind of comparable to what's out in the occupation. Given that same idea, when we looked at race, we noticed that any students of color, it was about 11% students of color versus 89% white within the program. And that was like, well, that doesn't seem right, but actually it's higher than compared to our community. Our community is 91% in our district. Our community is 91% white. So I think they're doing kind of a better job than in comparison to our, the number of people that we have within our community. But on the other hand, all the welding students were all over a 5-year period of time. All the welding students it was like 1% female, 99% male, and it was I want to believe that it was 95% white. Okay. Over a 5-year period of time. So you see that there's, especially some of the higher paying occupations, it's not equitable. We're not seeing that. So what they started putting into place was, how can we better reach these people, students? What are the issues? Why are we not getting students to come and participate in these programs? So they started trying to work on the marketing material and put things in place. So hopefully we'll see something better with that, because again, I know it's probably harder to get you can't change mindsets as far as maybe gender roles or so forth, but hopefully we can do a better job of reaching out and making it more inclusive as far as participation in some of these programs that are generally, dominated by, whites and within our community. So.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to your relationship with IR, or getting that disaggregated data and reviewing it regularly, right, and then implementing it at the program level. So that leads us into the next question here. Let's talk about the tools and relationships that you have leveraged to aid in the data collection and analysis related to the CLNA process.
I feel like a one-woman show. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I feel like I'm having coffee with a friend.
And thank you for interpreting for me. I know I sometimes don't get some of those words I don't necessarily use correctly, but okay. So for data collection, like on labor market, we used several labor market reports on like the Illinois Department of Employment Security website, Bureau of Labor Statistics, as well as we actually kind of go back and look at our local workforce board. They have their plans and so forth. So we kind of try to incorporate that information. For student data, we besides our own internal reports and the Perkins online data system, we'll look at some of the national student clearinghouse information. And then for our district data, we look at sites such as census.gov. And then for analysis, this is what we did that might be a little different. I don't know if anybody else does this, but I'm sure other people did this as well. We did a collaborative comprehensive local needs assessment with our ROEs. So we didn't have separate meetings. I collaborated with our EFE system directors, and we hosted the CNL meeting together. And that just was a way to, we're going to be using the majority of the same people. We're covering the same topics and so forth. So it just made sense for us to work together. And we just collaborated on the agenda, and they helped lead the meeting. So that's one way to leverage, I think, that relationship. And I think people that are out there are grateful they're not having to attend more than one meeting for it too. So.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that information. And one thing that we kind of alluded to earlier was your relationship with the research office. They send you data regularly, or what does that process look like for getting that information? I know it's required for the part of the process, but are you able to get access to that information sooner than you need it, or on a regular rolling basis?
It's just, we have access to a report generator.
Nice.
And so it's kind of we just go in and they can go in and update it. And I can access reports for all the different programs. It's filtered. It's a really cool little report system. So there's multiple reports, and we do have one that specifically has disaggregated data on students. You can go in and pick the program and pick, and it gives you all the details. And it can be a little challenging. You can put it in Excel and filter and sort and do all that kind of fun stuff if you like doing that stuff. So that's great. If you don't have something like that available to you, then you really need to be trying to work on that, because that saves a lot of time and effort on people's part. So. But like I said, I just let them do it, put it in the report, and then I'll read about it.
Right. And I'm always fascinated, because it seems as though every college has a different setup, right? So your IR could be a team of maybe 5 people or more than that. And then you could have, a one-woman show, and, it varies, right? And then the systems folks are used. So
I think we have, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go for it.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was just fascinated by the differences between the colleges and how, you might have a very different IR setup really in each college. So thank you for expanding on that.
I know we were the first one in Illinois. I don't know if since then anybody else, but we were the first community college in Illinois to get our system, our schools, our ERP system. So, and it's, Illinois is a unique in a few different ways we do things. So, some custom reports had to be created. And I know that there was the IR and the IT team worked together to really collaborate on creating some of those reports that we needed. And, the state reports, but then there's reports that are useful to us for gathering the information we need. So ours is a little, probably, we may be the only one that have the reports the way we have them, but I know that other people can still collect. We all collect the same information. So it's just a matter of pulling the reports together.
That's wonderful. Easy to access. I like that. All right, we want to make sure we leave time for Q&A from our guests here that are joining us. So we'll go to question 6 here. Are there any continuous processes of review that help prepare you for the final CLNA? So I know you've talked a little bit about this, but when you get closer to the end, what will that process look like, and any things that you utilize specifically to help streamline that process?
Okay, well, of course, so some of the answers, some of it's already answered before I go into the CLNA meeting, for the partnership meeting, because we've collected the data. We kind of know where we're not hitting the mark. And then, so, we'll utilize going over the data that we took into the CLNA. We'll look at the actual minutes from our CLNA meeting, and then also look at our annual advisory meeting minutes, because those can be very helpful because you might miss something in the CLNA. And the reason I bring that up is because I'll give you an example if this helps. So at one of it was our first, I think it was our first advisory committee meeting for a new program, which was medical assistant. And when we put these different reports together for that advisory meeting, the local market data wasn't very supportive of there being a need for the program, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So we brought that into the advisory committee meeting, and the employers disagreed very much with the labor market data because, and they said at the time, possibly that the data was collected, maybe they weren't hiring people for that position, medical assistants, but that was because there weren't any programs that offered the training for it. So there weren't qualified candidates for that role. So having that program started at the college, and it was only started because of employer, input, that they would like to see that. They wanted more medical assistants in our area. So because of that, then we're now going to be able to open up more jobs for those medical assistants. So that just gives an example of something that we found, that would be found in the advisory committee meetings that maybe we wouldn't have even realized in the CLNA. It's just those kind of things.
And a great partnership there to get the ball rolling. All right. So what advice do you have for colleagues related to leveraging resources and streamlining the process? If you could give some direct advice, what would it be?
Well, so the way I understand and look at the CLNA process is it's meant to ask questions that require you to think about how your college, maybe your policies or your processes, how those might impact students, and maybe how and student success, and if they're creating any barriers or issues for students, right? And if there are, if we can identify them, figure out, why we're doing that, kind of look at the data, see if we can figure out any, why there may be an issue, why it's causing that barrier, and then try to figure out a way to resolve it. So for me, finding the needs and equity issues isn't difficult. You can get to those reports and look for those things, and sometimes they just stand out. When you start looking for it, it'll just stand out. The next part, though, for me, that I find really difficult is figuring out why there's an issue. That's usually the biggest challenge for it. Well, maybe there's the other parts of it a little challenging too, but finding out why there's an issue can be really kind of more difficult too. So is there a course that's causing people to have issues completing, or maybe the cost of a cosmetology kit is creating a barrier for low-income students, like trying to figure out what that might be. So that can be the challenging part, and that takes a little bit more work. And there's asking people questions and kind of looking at different things, maybe student exit surveys and so forth, all those different things, trying to figure out what that is, because you really can't put a strategy or a plan in place until you know what the root cause of that problem is, right? So so basically, I would say, as far as leveraging resources, once you get those things, that OCCRL has those great there's a lot of different resources on OCCRL's website to help you with equity planning and implementations. ICSPS has like super strategies for special pop stuff. And then I think there's a root causes and strategies documentations for different issues on like napeequity.com. So I know I've used all those things to try to help with trying to come up with different strategies. But in a brand new one that I'm going to use this year, and thought I would just share that maybe with people, is, and maybe you guys have used it. This is the first time I've been using it. It was within the last month, but the Illinois has an Illinois school report card site. And I thought that was so interesting. I can go in there and I can see all the high school students and get their information, which gives me, these are the students that in the next 1 to 4 years could be potentially coming to Rend Lake. So I can look at the percentage of the number of students those high schools have, kind of look at the race ethnicity breakdown, look at the percentage of students from lower income households, percentage with an IEP. And it even lets you break it down to shows you the type of disabilities that, or the reasons they're getting those IEPs, what kind of why they're getting those services, and then percentage of homeless students. So that kind of lets me know, like, if I can anticipate it being similar to what we see in our current student population, but I know I'm going to be looking at that in the next 4 years, that if over 50% of our students are from low income, that we're still going to have those economic disadvantages. And if nothing else, like if we need to kind of go back and look at the resources we have available for students with disabilities, if they're coming with our, students that were at IEPs. So I think that's an interesting one that I'm going to start, kind of using in the future. I don't know if that's helpful, but
that's fantastic, because you're thinking about forecasting for the future.
Yeah.
If those students end up in, your 2-year college, which is
right.
Is
well, and you can compare it to the state averages. So I kind of thought we were very similar to the state averages and everything except homelessness. I think the state average for students was like a 2 point something. We were over 6%, which I know they're that could be living with grandparents or, not, but so that was really high, 3 times higher than the state average with homelessness. So we really, that'll be something I'll be taking into the CLNA thing. What is something we can do? Because I feel like maybe that might be a bigger issue in our district than maybe in other parts of the state. So we'll see what happens with that. But
nice work with using the resources that are out there. That's fantastic. Well, I want to be sure I leave time for our guests who are joining us today in our coffee conversation to ask any questions that they might have. So it looks like we might have one in the chat here. So let me take a look at that there for you. Oh, that's Marcy letting us know that unfortunately, Dr. Ivory could not join us today because of an emergency situation with a student. However, Kristina, this conversation with us has been fantastic. So I really appreciate you being here, and would love to take any questions from the audience. So now's the chance if you would like to unmute yourself and or use your mic or chat us a question in the chat box. Okay, we've got a question here from Amy Dudlaney. She'd like to know, how many members do you have on your CLNA team?
Okay, so we kind of tried to limit. Okay, so we did survey some things like deans and program directors and so forth. We didn't have all of them in the CLNA meeting because it would be too much. You have too many. So we tried to limit it, try to keep it around 20 at our meeting. So we invited more business and industry, but when you start adding your Perkins people, the ROE, we had WIOA representation. We had people from our adult education department, some people from our student services department. We had business and industry partners. We'd invited some other community partnerships, like there was a place in Mount Vernon. I remember inviting them. I can't remember. It's been 2 years ago since I've had this. So we invited some partnerships for, some where we do some of our community resource when we send people for services that we really don't have ways to offer them. We had 1 or 2 students. We had invited more, but I think we invited around 30. We were hoping for about 20. I remember, it seems to me like we ended up with 16 or 17 in the actual meeting. And it was so that was the actual partnerships where they were in the actual room with us. We did survey, like I said, and ask specific questions to other people throughout the college and some other employers when that we had invited, but I didn't do it out broadly to like all our employers, if that makes sense. And I'm wondering if anybody else, like, who you guys invite, like, am I missing something? Because I feel like, you're always wondering if you're missing people that you could have on there. I had asked, should I include the high school guidance counselors? And our EFEs were like, no, we think we're covering for that. And then, that's just something we could go ask them, outside of the meeting itself. So.
Thank you.
I don't know if that.
All right. Okay, we have another question coming in from Megan. She said this information is great, so they're thanking you for that. I have a more basic question since I'm new to the process. When I search for the ICCB CLNA resources, I come to a page and none of the links work. I'm unable to find the current page with updated links. Ah, yes, okay.
Try a different browser. I was having problems yesterday trying to get to, and I had to try a different browser. I think I was using Internet Explorer and it wouldn't let me. I was using Google Chrome, it wouldn't let me. I think Microsoft Edge, it let me. Try a different browser.
She said, okay, thank you. I've also had that issue. And in fact, it is usually the browser almost always, unless they're fixing.
I'm sorry, you knew the answer and I jumped right in there.
No. You're the expert here. I just thought it was funny. For a couple of days, I couldn't figure out how to get it working. And then I finally thought, well, you might want to try it on a different.
Well, there are a couple other times where I was having that issue. And if I went to the home page and then click search and found that link, sometimes it would take me, but I think it's just best to get a different browser.
Right. I think you're right. We also have the link there in the chat box. Any other questions from our audience here? All right. Not seeing any questions here. Feel free to unmute or to chat in the chat box.
Hi, Kristina, it's Marcy. I just wanted to say I so appreciate your example when you talked about looking at the data and thinking about homelessness, right? And comparing that, because I really think that demonstrates so much, of why this is valuable. And also, as we think about the impact of the pandemic, and I know you all are situated in a more rural part of the state, right? Where you may not have, or families may not have access to the same resources you might have in a more metropolitan area. And so I just really appreciate how you talked about that in terms of your, understanding context and digging deeper, because as you said, those are the things that are really important for you all to know. And
Yes.
on a broader level, like when you talked about working with your ROEs, that's going to affect families and students throughout the educational pipeline, right? So the value of coming together to think about, this is what is the root cause? And I just really appreciated that example that you gave, because I think it really highlights the value of this, and why it's important, and kind of that how it becomes a tangible thing that's really helpful when we think about equity and we think about barriers. So I just want to say I really appreciated that.
There's another really good example of that. We've been trying to, as far as recruitment, especially, trying to create maybe more awareness of programs and so forth. Because we are a predominantly white area, we really see that we're not getting the number of, and again, that would also be African American and Latino students to attend. And we've been working so diligently. We got together. We've been trying to create some. We've actually created a committee, because we're all good about creating a bunch of committees, but with our community, with some community leaders, and we were trying to think, what can we do to recruit we went out to the community and asked them directly, right? What can we do to better recruit for students? Like, what is there something we're doing that's turning students away from us? And I think you have to be open to when you ask them, you have to be open to what they're going to say, because we might have been thinking we need to come into this area more frequently, which we're planning to do, and which they said yes, but you need to come up with ways to find, particularly, and it was something we weren't expecting. We have issues finding employment for students who what they were seeing as an issue was they had ex-offenders that were not finding ways to find employments for them, that they were being rejected because maybe they had a felony on the record, and so the knee-jerk reaction was like, well, I can't put them in health care because there's background checks and you can't, and so you can't like start. So we had to come to the mindset, stop saying we can't and start thinking about how we could, so that's what we're working on. Again, it's a challenge, but if we really are sincere about wanting to help, then you have to be open to what the results you get and what people are saying back to you.
That's a
I'm
wonderful.
done with that soapbox, sorry.
No, that's a wonderful point. And I know we're getting close to time here, but I do want to give Joanne a quick opportunity to she's joined us, to give us a quick introduction of herself, and also to share with us just an overview of how she is able in her context to streamline the process for the CLNA and leverage resources. So Joanne, if you'd like to chat with us, now is the time.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I apologize for being late. It has just been a morning. I've had like 5 student issues going on, and I'm still in the midst of it. However, with respect to the CLNA, I've used it to leverage to help us to, as we move forward in classes, to figure out what we are going to, next steps, and working with employers to identify, what's missing, to help to identify those gaps, which has been extremely helpful, especially now in the midst of a pandemic, and it has made them to rethink skill sets and strategies and things that they asked of the college. So the CLNA has been very helpful. I have relooked at some of the questions and thought about how we can refine them to really drill into it, and to, I guess for me, it's more about helping the employee to understand the value proposition for them, which in turn helps us as we develop programs and courses. So it's been really helpful. We are gearing up to do a round 2 in the spring for we're gonna do another survey. I've got, because what I found worked for us, rather than sending it out to everybody across, every business partner across the entire college, is to do it by sectors. So that has been very helpful to us, because that was one of the employers, because we asked general questions, but if I do it by sectors, then I'm able to drill down more for specific program area information. So that's our plan for moving forward.
Wonderful, thank you. And we know your morning has been wildly busy, but we do really appreciate you joining us.
No, it's my pleasure. This is very important to me. So I'm absolutely going to be listening to the video, the recorded sessions, so that I can get the full benefit.
Fantastic. And we will also have more webinars coming up in the future, so please stay tuned.
Absolutely.
Well, we also have our contacted listed here, our contact information, so feel free to reach out to all of us. We hope to continue to collaborate and synergize across all of our different areas of expertise. And as mentioned before, we also have more webinars coming up, so be sure to sign up for our newsletter through OCCRL's website. The first thing that pops up when you look at the website, and you'll get an opportunity to get live updates on what's going on. And don't forget, I'm sure many of you will be attending this year. The conference for the CSCC will happen in Tempe, Arizona, where it's a little bit warmer than it is here in Champaign right now. And that'll be March 31st through April 2nd. And it's the 63rd annual conference. So be sure to have that on your calendars as well. And as always, we want to thank you for joining us today. And this information was brought to you through OCCRL and our partnerships there. And just can't thank you all enough for joining us and learning more about how to streamline and leverage resources for the CLNA. So thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful day.